So we're continuing on in our last unit here, and what I always like to do in my intro classes at least is give you all kind of a survey of different philosophies of life, different worldviews or systems which might orient you and give you an idea about how to live, about what you're supposed to value, about the kind of life path that you should be on. We started off by looking at a piece by Helen Keller, who encouraged a very optimistic disposition and attitude towards life. She thought that optimism somehow opens up the possibility for real achievement and heroism and fulfillment. And then we looked at Bertrand Russell, and the piece that we read, A Free Man's Worship, was written when he was a little bit more Platonic in his philosophy, but he encouraged us to utilize the freedom that we have as human beings to critically reflect and internalize our situation as mortal creatures, but seek after these transcendent ideals, truth, beauty, and goodness. And that if we make the world, if we try to shape the world on those ideals, we'll be able to live a fulfilling life and make the world a better place, hopefully. Well, we're going to kind of take a foray back into ancient philosophy today, because we're going to be looking at a rather commonsensical philosophy of life, one that a lot of people probably follow without realizing it. Today we're looking at Epicurus. Epicurus was an ancient Greek philosopher, and the kind of worldview or philosophy that he developed was one of the offshoots of how philosophy evolved after the Romans conquered the Greeks. During the time of Plato and Socrates and a little bit after him, the Greek world was steeped, the intellectual world, in some Platonism and Aristotelianism, which were a little bit different. But slowly societies change, ideas change. And so after these really important historical events, what we see is that coming out of this period, there are three main philosophies that people started to do work on and research and develop. One of these is skepticism. You can probably guess what that means from the word, right? The skeptics were skeptical about the nature of the universe. Like those who would come in the Enlightenment many years later, they didn't just want to dogmatically accept the traditions and ideas that they were handed, but actually think about this stuff and use their skeptical dispositions to poke holes in arguments and try to come to a better understanding of the world. For our purposes, though, it's the other two that are more important today. One of those is Stoicism. Now, I think we could have read a piece on Stoicism, but we did not. So I'll just give you a brief overview of that. Stoicism was a philosophy that was picked up and developed by a few Roman thinkers, most notably among them, I think, being Marcus Aurelius. Now, Marcus Aurelius was one of the emperors of the Roman Empire, and this was a guy who had it all. He had all the power, all the opportunity to live kind of whatever life he wanted. Could have gotten the best food, drugs, sex that he wanted, the riches, all the land that his heart desired. But yet he didn't really live that kind of life. He didn't live a life that was seeking after just the satisfaction of his desires or power and wealth. Instead, the kind of philosophy that he writes about in his meditations, which were his personal journals during his experience as emperor, is one in which he encourages a self-mastery. Not just giving in to your desires and impulses, but thinking critically and rationally about things, allowing reason to guide your life, not allowing your emotions to get the best of you. So a very moderate lifestyle, you might say. One which encourages denying the will if it's going to lead you down a wrong path. Well, the philosophy that we're looking at today is a little bit similar to Stoicism, but it also departs in a few different ways, not only from Stoicism, but also from the Platonic philosophy that came before it. Epicurus was a philosopher who, instead of encouraging a kind of denying of the will, encouraged the satisfaction of our desires in some way. Although, as we'll see, his philosophy of life is a little bit more moderate than you might see in those who are living today, because of the luxuries and opportunities that we have. So just to contrast this philosophy of life with Platonism, there are a few important differences. Epicurus argued for the epistemology of empiricism. What did empiricism say? Well, the primary way that we obtain knowledge of the universe around us is through our senses, through our lived existence, right? In contrast, Platonism was very rationalistic. It thought that we could uncover the basic properties of the universe and how it worked by using our reasoning capacities. And rather relying on our senses, our eyes, ears, nose, sense of touch, all that, Socrates and Plato instead said, if you lean into reason, you'll be able to get behind the appearances and actually uncover what's actually going on. So Epicurus is on the empiricist side rather than the rationalist side, just like John Locke was on the empiricist side and Descartes was on the rationalist side. In contrast to Platonism, which encouraged us to seek after reason or perhaps a certain kind of goodness in our lives, although that ideal might be better identified with the philosophy of Christianity, right? Seeking after righteousness or moral goodness. Epicureanism encouraged us to pursue pleasure. So it conceived of pleasure as the highest good. That's where our lives should be oriented, towards pleasure. Consequently, this would lead Epicurus into developing a philosophy that prioritized what we might call earthly things rather than transcendent things. Recall what Plato discussed in his book Republic, which we looked at briefly in the allegory of the cave. For Plato, the material world that we live in is an imperfect reflection of this otherworldly realm of the forms, which contains these transcendental ideals on which all of this stuff is based. But all of this material stuff are just imperfect reflections of those ideals. So those ideals up there in the realm of the forms that we can't see or touch or taste are important, and they're perfect and they're universal and eternal. And so Platonic philosophy was like, you got to look to that stuff. That's the stuff that you should be concerned with if you want to lead a fulfilling life and understand what the hell all of this is. We saw a little bit of this in Russell as well, right? When he held up those ideals of the true, the good, and the beautiful in order for us to live a fulfilling life. But Epicurus is going to say, that's not really going to help you, okay? What you should be prioritizing is your earthly existence. You don't know if the gods exist. You don't know if there's an afterlife. You've never seen this realm of the forms. Okay, do you have any evidence for it? You'd probably say no. So what you should care about is the here and now. What is happening to you? What's going on in the world? How does your body feel? All of these different things. So it encourages a kind of present earthly life rather than one that's oriented towards these things that are above you in some metaphysical dimension. Okay? In this way, we might also contrast it with Christianity, Christian philosophy, which would say, no, you shouldn't prioritize your earthly life. You should prioritize living a heavenly life, right? A life that's going to get you into the good place. One that obeys the will of God. That's what you should orient your life around. And finally, Epicurus departed from some of the other Greek thinkers in another important way. And that is that he argued for what we might call an atomistic metaphysics. So if you look closely in this word, you'll see what? Atom, right? This is something that you'll have heard in your science classes. Epicurus thought that what the universe was composed of were atoms, these minute, indivisible particles moving within the void. That is what the universe is. So we might say that his metaphysic is kind of materialistic, in contrast to Christianity and Platonism, which doesn't think everything can be explained in terms of the motions of atoms or material causes. So all of these ideas kind of inform the philosophy that we're going to be investigating today. Now, if you didn't know a lot about Epicurus, you might suppose that he's advocating for a philosophy of hedonism. And that's kind of true. He is advocating for a specific type of hedonistic philosophy. But as we'll see, it doesn't exactly line up with some of the gross hedonisms that you may have heard about throughout your life. What is hedonism? Well, it's a philosophy of life which argues that the fulfilling life is aimed towards pleasure and the satisfaction of your desire. So when you think of hedonism, what occurs to you? What pops up for you? If somebody is living hedonistically, what are they doing?
I think it's looked at, I kind of subconsciously look at it as just a negative thing in general.
A negative thing. Okay, why?
Well, when you call someone hedonistic, it's usually not a compliment. It's usually
Yeah.
like I mean, granted, it's not a very common thing to call people, but like, I guess in the intellectual, academic atmosphere, if you want to call it that, like,
Sure.
like I've heard that in academia, but it's usually never a positive thing.
And why isn't it a positive thing? Like if somebody's living a hedonistic lifestyle, what are they doing?
It's usually kind of self-centered. I think that's like the main thing that it kind of focuses on is like self-centered, not caring about other people's or your own strifes and how going for your own pleasure and your own satisfaction is harmful to other people or even harmful to your own life because you can put everything else to the side.
So there's an aspect to it of self-interestedness, right? Well, just think about how a lot of students your age are living. What are they doing on the weekends? Are they sitting in and working out, eating a healthy meal, reading a good book, and doing their homework on Fridays? No, they're going to get shit-faced with their friends, right? Or they're going to do a candy flip at the club, okay? I don't know if y'all know what that is. Maybe that's not a term that's used anymore. The gross hedonistic lifestyle is associated with things like drinking, sex, drug use, material comforts. And we all kind of live like this a little bit, right? We do want to do things that make us feel good. We do want to satisfy our desires, right? Sometimes getting drunk can be great. Sometimes going to the club with your friends and staying out until 3 a.m. and then getting pizza afterwards when you're blackout is a fun experience, right? So somebody is living what I'm going to call this kind of hedonistic lifestyle. They're oriented towards pleasure and the satisfaction of their own desires. But as you noted, if you go too far down that path, that can harm other people, right? If you're just caring about your own desires and satisfying them in your own comfort, that might cause you to not fulfill your moral and social obligations, right? Not uphold the social contract. So there are a few different reasons why Epicureanism is going to depart from this just a little bit, this simplified philosophy of life. One of those reasons is because it might not promote the most amount of happiness within you. Another is that it might end up hurting you. Think about it. If you spend every day getting drunk because it feels good, how are you going to feel the next morning? Every day. Pretty bad, right? If you choose the cake over the salad every time for lunch, how are you going to feel? Bloated and gross. You're not going to be having a good time, right? You're not going to be getting those vitamins and minerals that you need. So, described in this way, we could say Epicureanism is a specific type of hedonistic lifestyle, but it's going to be one that's going to say you shouldn't just lean endlessly into pleasure. You should live kind of a more moderate life. You should be aware of the consequences that your actions have on yourself and others. And instead of prioritizing just pleasure, it's going to say we should be trying to achieve something else. What Epicurus is going to call ataraxia, or untroubledness. One of those fancy Greek words. And as we'll see, Epicurus is going to say, in contrast to some hedonistic thinkers, that you don't need all the money, power, drugs, sex, alcohol in the world to be happy. Rather, you should live a more moderate lifestyle that learns to find contentment in the little things, such as good conversation, good friendships, a good community, some wine at dinner. Okay? And so we're going to define his philosophy of life, Epicureanism, as follows. We're going to call it an ancient philosophy of life, which argues that the fulfilling life is one which seeks after ataraxia or untroubledness. So we shouldn't just be leaning hard into pleasure, 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 satisfaction of desire, but reducing suffering, which is a different kind of orientation, right? Pursuing pleasure isn't the same thing as diminishing suffering or cultivating untroubledness. He encourages us to try to live a life that has pleasure in it, moderate pleasure, but one which is free from anxiety, worry, and pain. So we're looking for both physical and mental untroubledness. And not only this, but he thinks that the best kind of life is one that's lived in community with those that you love and care about, and that care about you. And that is kind of in your body and in the here and now. So not just getting lost in all these metaphysical abstractions and worries, but like paying attention to what's going on, focusing on the moment, thinking about the consequences of your actions too, but not worrying endlessly about all these things that you don't have knowledge about or can't control. Does that make sense? We can see how this philosophy of life is different from Platonism and Christianity and the kind of philosophy that Russell espoused, right? What we get from Russell's thought is, look, there are these transcendental ideals that you should map your life on. Epicurus is going to say, are there such things? How do you know what they are? Why don't you just focus on you and try to screen out those things that you don't understand or can't control? Why don't you focus on the here and now, try to cultivate pleasure, but not so much pleasure that it's going to hurt you, right? Like having sex with 1,000 people in 3 years, or, drinking until you're blackout every night, which might be good in the moment, but which is going to come back to bite you in the ass. Right? So it's a very kind of simple, commonsensical view. It's kind of hedonistic because it thinks that pleasure is a good thing and we should seek after it, but not to our own detriment. That's where Epicurus thinks people go wrong. They lean too far into this, and that ends up hurting them. He thinks that satisfying our natural desires are good. Our desire for food, drink, relationship, psychological security, maybe. But like Rousseau, in some way, he thinks that we're also filled up with these desires that aren't going to provide us fulfillment if we attain them. These are what he calls empty desires. Desires that can't be fulfilled. For example, maybe you have a desire for everybody to like you. Maybe you have a desire to be the most powerful person in the world, or the wealthiest, or you have a desire to be famous. He would say, maybe you'll be able to achieve that, but even satisfying those desires are not going to fulfill you. So you should focus on satisfying your natural desires that you have as a human being, not these artificial desires, and learning to rest easy in their satisfaction, not striving endlessly after these things that aren't going to serve or help you. Okay? In this way, it has a little bit in common with that hedonism we talked about before. Pleasure is good, satisfy your desires. But on the flip side, Epicureanism is going to say also, you need to pursue the proper desires, satisfy those. You shouldn't pursue desire, so much that it ends up hurting you. And he thinks that you should learn to become content living a more ascetic lifestyle. That is, a lifestyle that doesn't need a lot of things in order for you to be happy. This is a far cry from the kinds of lives that we are living today, surrounded by all of this material luxury, right? And these desires for things like iPhones and squishmallows and laptops. Because he says that if you can learn to become content with a kind of simple life, you will be happy. Because you're going to be able to achieve what you need. If you learn to be happy with having your hunger satisfied. If you can learn to be happy enjoying the view of a landscape. If you can learn to be happy having a conversation with your friends, eating with them, hanging out with them. This is going to be a sustainable life path for you, and one that is going to provide you with fulfillment. Because you don't need all that other crap, okay? He's going to say you've just kind of been conditioned into thinking that you need it. Even if you got it, it wouldn't fulfill you. All the power, wealth, fame, sex in the world isn't going to fulfill you. And so in this way, it kind of departs from that gross hedonism I've been describing, which is going to say, go for the wealth, go for the power, go for the drugs and the alcohol and the sexual pleasure and all that. Rather, he's going to say, no, you need to learn to be content with a more simple, a more ascetic lifestyle. Oops. Does that make sense? Are you following along? It's not too hard, right? It's a rather simple, commonsensical view. Probably going to be the simplest view that we're looking at in this unit. It doesn't have a lot of moving parts. Okay, now that I've given you a little bit of an overview, what I'd like to do now is kind of read some of the sections in the reading that I asked you to do for today. Epicurus's Principal Doctrines. Because I think if we actually look at the text, that's going to help us understand what Epicurus is getting at and where he thinks a lot of our troubledness and suffering comes from in life. So if you have the reading, please pull it up. We're just going to look at a few sections here, read through them, discuss them a little bit, and see what you all think. So pull up the reading and go to the second section, which is going to be on death. You already know that death gives a lot of people anxiety, right? They try not to think about it, because by thinking about their inevitable demise, that brings them a lot of worry, right? And people have worries for a variety of reasons. They want to continue living because they like living. Maybe they're afraid of, upsetting their family members and who they're going to be leaving behind. Maybe people are afraid of what's going to happen to them after they die, right? Where they're going to go. This provides a lot of anxiety to people. But what Epicurus tries to do in this section on death is dispel some of those worries and provide us with a kind of argument for why we shouldn't really think too much about death and why we shouldn't stress out about it. What does he say? He says, death is nothing to us. For the body, when it has been resolved into its elements, has no feeling. And that which has no feeling is nothing to us. What is he saying? Why should we not worry about death?
Because we're going to not be conscious to even remember what it feels like.
Yeah, that's a part of it. Yeah, what else do you think? Why shouldn't we fear death? He says it is nothing to us. People certainly think it is something. Okay, well, how about this? What is death? What does it mean to die? Mm-hmm.
It's like most people consider it like the finality of our life, or like a life in general, just kind of like the end all be all.
Yeah, it's the end of existence, you might say, right? What happens when you die? The lights go out, right? Or at least that's how Epicurus is thinking about it. He's like, what is death? Death means you're no longer alive. You're no longer here. You're gone. And so what does that imply? Well, what he's thinking is people have all this worry and anxiety about death, but here's the funny thing about death. You're never going to experience it. Why? Well, because death is the cessation of experience. It's not something you're going to undergo or experience consciously. You might experience dying, but you're not going to experience death. Does that make sense? Is that weird? If death is the end of your consciousness, if death is the end of your life, it's not something that you can feel, right? It's just that you're feeling one moment and then you're gone the next. What do we worry about in life? Things that feel bad, right? Pain, suffering, our boyfriend cheating on us, because that makes us feel bad. Death is not something you're going to feel. So why would you worry about it? Why would you have all this anxiety about it? It's not going to be something that you feel. And thus he says, most fear and our anxiety comes from our notions of death. But these fears and anxieties are misguided. They misunderstand what death is. However, what he's saying in this brief section is that death is nothing to fear, because it is the end of all perception and feeling. We won't feel or experience it. We'll just be alive and here one moment, and then gone the next. So what do you think about this argument? Do you think he's right? Do you like it? Does this provide you with some kind of security, ease your anxiety a little bit? What do you think?
So does he think it's just like after we pass over, like it's just like emptiness, like we just experience like blackness?
There's no experience. But yeah, that's like the closest thing that we could say. Yeah, it's not like you're going to be living eternally in the void, experience blackness. It's just you're gone. That's it. You won't be experiencing anything. You won't be feeling any pain. You won't be feeling any suffering. You won't be bored because you'll be gone. So what do you think? Yeah.
I think that's where the fear comes from, is the fact that there is nothing.
You think so?
Yeah, I think the fear of having all these choices, decisions, material things, relationships,
Yeah.
and then all of it being gone. Even though people know, like, if it's just gone, obviously you're not gonna like.
You're not going to care about it. You're not going to miss it, right?
I think the fear comes from not being able to see people again, not being able to, like, when you're dead, you're done. That's it, you know? I think
Okay.
that's where the fear comes from.
Okay, so you think the fear comes from people wanting to grasp and hold on to what they have? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I could see that, right? There are a lot of cool things that we can do in life, right? We can drink coffee. We can, I don't know, watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, right? We can pet our cats. That's nice. But here's the way you could think about it. You don't feel any negative way towards all of the years that you weren't alive. Are you upset that you didn't come into an existence sooner? No, you don't give a shit. So why would you care about your existence ending like that? There's kind of an asymmetry there, right? Epicurus is going to say, that's a little weird. Why are you worrying so much about this? Maybe you have some sort of idea that I'm afraid of death because I'm afraid of what's going to happen after. Right? People have that worry. They're like, oh God, I don't want to die because maybe hell's real and I'm going to go to hell. But what would Epicurus say? Why are you worried about that? Some old guy with a beard told you that there's heaven and hell and you believe it? Do you have any evidence for hell? Have you ever experienced that? Do you know heaven and hell exist? No. Well, then why are you thinking about it? You don't even know if God exists. So he says, if you can learn to just accept your mortality and realize it for what it is, so many of your fears and anxieties are going to go away. These fears and anxieties come from an improper understanding of the kind of thing that you are, and your confidence in things that, well, you don't even know are true in the first place. So he would say, don't worry about it. Stop thinking about it. You're just driving yourself crazy. How about sections 3 to 5? Let's check those out. He says, the magnitude of pleasure reaches its limit in the removal of all pain. When pleasure is present, so long as it is uninterrupted, there is no pain either of body or of mind or of both together. Continuous pain does not last long in the body. On the contrary, pain, if extreme, is present a short time. And even that degree of pain, which barely outweighs pleasure in the body, does not last for many days together. Illnesses of long duration even permit of an excess of pleasure over pain in the body. It is impossible to live a pleasant life without living wisely and well and justly. And it is impossible to live wisely and well and justly without living pleasantly. Whenever any one of these is lacking, when, for instance, the person is not able to live wisely, though he lives well and justly, it is impossible for him to live a pleasant life. So what do you think he's saying in some of these sections? Maybe we'll start with section 3. He's talking about pleasure and pain. What's he trying to get at there? Any ideas? Well, what does he say? Let's just reread 3. The magnitude of pleasure reaches its limit in the removal of all pain. When pleasure is present, so long as it is uninterrupted, there is no pain, either of body or of mind or of both together. What he's implying here is something kind of interesting. People have this idea that you're either experiencing like positive pleasure, woo, and you're happy, or you're experiencing pain and suffering. But what he's saying is, pleasure is actually more than that. You're experiencing pleasure right now. Because pleasure is the state that you're in when all pain and suffering has been removed. Right now you are content. Are you wanting for anything right now? Maybe if I put a piece of chocolate cake in front of you, then you might start wanting it, right? But right now you're content, right? You're fine. He's like, that in itself is a kind of pleasure. To be content, to not be wanting and grasping. That is a pleasurable kind of state. And so, what this implies is that the absence of suffering is pleasure in some sense. And if we continue down into section 4, what he notes is that people make too much out of the sufferings of their life, or out of the pain that they experience. When you're in pain, you want to flee from it, right? So quickly, you want to get out of it. You think it's terrible. You think it's awful. The worst thing that's happened to you. But Epicurus would say, just look back on the painful experiences that you've had. Were they really that bad? No. They were not as bad as you think they are, and they were much shorter in duration than all the time you spent in your life in the absence of suffering, which again is pleasurable. So, like, look, if you looked at your life and you counted it all up, your net experience is one of pleasure, not of pain and suffering. It is this misguided human tendency to focus on the bad and the negative and the suffering that causes us to think, woe is me, my life is so bad, everything sucks. And Epicurus is just like, look at things honestly, man. It's not that bad, and the pain and suffering doesn't last for that long. So we could say in section 3, he advocates for a kind of sober or moderate hedonism. We shouldn't seek positive pleasure all the time, bombarding ourselves with these images and colors and feelings. Sometimes that's good. But we should seek after, again, ataraxia. Because that itself is a kind of pleasurable existence, and one that is easier to attain. We might even liken it to the pleasurable absence of suffering. And then what does he say in section 4? Look, the suffering in our life is not too much to endure. Why? It doesn't last that long, and it's not that bad. What do you think? Do you agree with him on that? You agree with him that the sufferings in our lives we kind of build up and we think they're worse than they are, and we think that they lasted much longer than they actually did? What do you think? Maybe it would help to reflect on your life. How bad has your life been? Pain-wise, suffering-wise. Have you ever been in pain, agonizing pain, for weeks at a time? Many of us haven't, right? Probably. I don't know your whole story, but no, what our life seems to be, if we look at it rationally and honestly, is by and large the absence of suffering with little moments of suffering now and then. Do you agree with that picture? Is that how our lives actually are? Yeah.
It makes me think of like people who experience like very lifelong mental illnesses, because sometimes like every day for people is really painful, and like getting out of bed is really painful every day, and that can happen for years at a time. So, I mean, it's not everyone, but a lot of people, especially today, struggle like that. So
Sure.
I feel like in a more simpler world, that's rational, but I feel like we also do experience a lot of stress, like unneeded stress in our society today.
Yeah, so certainly there are people who are living lives that have a lot of suffering in them, right?
Or like terminal illnesses, like people who have cancer, like how do you explain, like you can't just say that they don't experience pain for years at a time, because a lot of people do.
Yeah. So maybe I could reframe this. I don't think Epicurus is trying to make a claim that's true for everyone. I think he's making a general claim. Like, generally speaking, for the majority of people, it ain't that bad. But we're focusing on the bad stuff. Does that seem true to your life experience? Or are you just the most wretched, unhappy, suffering person? Maybe you are, I don't know. Maybe you're not finding much solace in this philosophy. But Epicurus would say, even if your life kind of sucks, that doesn't mean it's always going to suck. Maybe there are steps that you can take to become more content with your life and your existence. Certainly that's something that we could all be doing. We're not all the best versions of ourselves. But what exactly is involved in this kind of pleasurable life? Well, again, he's not advocating for, go to orgies every day, do lines in the bathroom every day. No. Actually, he kind of ties together in section 5 pleasure and wisdom and justice. And he says, living a pleasurable life seems to require, at least a little bit, living wisely and justly, which means treating yourself appropriately and treating others appropriately. Why? Well, think about it. When you hurt someone, you feel bad, right? When you lie to someone, you feel bad. When you hurt someone, you feel bad. So he would say, something else that you should be trying to pursue in your life is, treating yourself and others justly. Because that is going to make others feel good, and it's going to make you feel good. And plus, if you treat others unjustly, you're going to end up with just a whole bunch of problems down the line because people are going to come after you, right? Or try to get one over on you. Get revenge. So, only the ethical, wise, just life really is the most pleasurable life. Does that seem right to y'all? Do you think that for you to be most fulfilled and happy and to experience the most pleasure, there's like an ethical dimension to that? And a wise dimension to that? Or do you think even people who are really stupid and really unjust also live pleasurable lives? Do you think Hitler lived a pleasurable life? I would venture to guess probably not. At least the end of his life wasn't so good. In any case, he's not saying that you need to become Captain Justice, okay? But what he's saying is treating others the appropriate way and yourself the appropriate way is going to lead to more pleasure and the absence of more suffering than not. And I think that's a commonsensical thing that most people could get behind, right? Again, this is a kind of a very simple, commonsensical view. But it's very powerful because it lines up with a lot of the intuitions that people have about what is going to allow them to live a fulfilled life. Okay, how about sections 16 through 21? Let's jump ahead a little bit. What does he say there? Fortune but seldom interferes with the wise person. His greatest and highest interests have been, are, and will be directed by reason throughout the course of his life. The just person enjoys the greatest peace of mind, while the unjust is full of the utmost disquietude. Pleasure in the body admits no increase when once the pain of want has been removed. After that, it only admits a variation. The limit of pleasure in the mind, however, is reached when we reflect on the things themselves and their congeners, which cause the mind the greatest alarms. Unlimited time and limited time afford an equal amount of pleasure, if we measure the limits of that pleasure by reason. The body receives as unlimited the limits of pleasure, and to provide it requires unlimited time. But the mind, grasping in thought what the end and limit of the body is, in banishing the terrors of futurity, procures a complete and perfect life, and has no longer any need of unlimited time. Nevertheless, it does not shun pleasure, and even in the hour of death, when ushered out of existence by circumstances, the mind does not lack enjoyment of the best life. He who understands the limits of life knows how easy it is to procure enough to remove the pain of want and make the whole of life complete and perfect. Hence, he has no longer any need of things which are not to be won save by labor and conflict. Okay, so he's saying a lot of things here, right? And we're not going to go into each one of them. But let's just kind of reflect on each of these sections. Fortune but seldom interferes with the wise person. What do you think that means? Some people think that their lives are just a series of ridiculous accidents that prevent them from being happy, and things that they can't foresee, and everything is everybody else's fault. Epicurus is going to say, okay, maybe some people are really unlucky like that. But if you cultivate wisdom, if you reflect on your experience and draw lessons from that, if you use your reason in the appropriate way to think about and control what you can, you're not going to experience all these crazy accidents of fate and fortune. No, fortune but seldom interferes with the wise person. If you use your life experience and your reason appropriately, that's going to help you understand how the world works so that you can move within it and so that these crazy things won't happen to you. Does that seem right to you? If you use your reason and life experience appropriately, you're not going to get screwed over by all these unforeseen things that come out of left field.
I think sometimes.
Okay, say more. Yeah.
Obviously things that like you can't prevent everything, but if you use the skills and things you've learned in life, then you can mitigate bad things that happen to you a little bit more easily.
Right. Yeah, that's basically what he's trying to get at here. He's not going to say bad things don't sometimes happen. Like, certainly things are going to happen in your life that you're not going to be able to control. But if you work on yourself, if you keep your eyes open and your ear to the ground, you're going to drastically reduce these crazy things happening. Because you're living smartly. That's the general idea here. You'll be able to foresee some of the dangers coming. You'll be able to move and react in the appropriate ways. In other words, part of attaining a pleasurable, happy life is learning how the universe works so we can best move and operate within it. Okay, how about section 17? The just person enjoys the greatest peace of mind, while the unjust is full of the utmost disquietude. This one's pretty commonsensical, right? If you do the right things, you will be at peace. If you're an asshole, you're not going to be at peace. Does that seem right to you? What do you think? Man, y'all are deader than me today. I thought I was tired. Huh. Do you think people who are mean, do bad stuff, and treat other people unfairly all the time, do they live a peaceful life? Epicurus would say maybe they put on a show that they're happy and peaceful. But no, their conscience is bothering them. Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing. But no, if you're rude and mean and you look at things negatively, then I mean, like, we look at people now and like, how can you be so negative and also be happy? Like, if you find a problem with everyone, if you find a problem with everything, then obviously you're not happy. I mean, I think some people find happiness in having problems with things.
Yeah.
Like some people literally just can't be happy. But I don't think that that's born out of peace. I think that's born out of some sort of internal strife.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, there are some people who learn to enjoy their, well, let's just say less than perfect life because it's predictable and they're used to it, right? If you've had depression, you may have felt this way for an extended period of time. I went through a period of my life where I was deeply apathetic. The only emotions I could feel were rage and despair. And there was something very comforting about that because it was predictable. I was never surprised by anything. But that isn't real peace, right? That isn't real contentment. That is a short-sighted, limited, perhaps toxic form of peace and security. So do the right thing, and you're not going to suffer from your mind bugging you. Pretty commonsensical. Pleasure in the body, he says in 18, admits no increase when once the pain of want has been removed. After that, it only admits a variation. The limit of pleasure in the mind, however, is reached when we reflect on the things themselves and their congeners, which cause the mind the greatest alarms. So what's he saying? Your body has natural desires and urges, right? Satisfying those desires and urges in the moment are good, but they're not going to completely eliminate them, right? If you're hungry, you eat food for lunch, but what's going to happen around 6 p.m.? You're going to get hungry again, right? But the mind works a little bit differently. The limit of pleasure in the mind is reached when we reflect on the things themselves, which cause the mind the greatest alarms. If you want to become mentally secure and happy, you need to figure out what's causing you the anxiety and the stress and the suffering that you're living through. You should reflect on that. So often, however, people go through their lives dealing with suffering and anxiety, and they don't try to find the root cause of the problem. But mentally, you might say, we are capable of that, perhaps with some professional help. And we're capable of taking actions that will prevent that kind of pain and suffering in the future. And so just like we'll see in Buddhism, what he's implying here is your mental state, the capacities of your mind, are going to have a huge bearing on whether or not you're going to live a happy and fulfilled life. A lot is going to come down to that. And so we might think that this section is kind of echoing the first verse in the Dhammapada. The mind is the forerunner to all things. Although the Buddhists are getting at a little bit more there. Unlimited time and limited time afford an equal amount of pleasure if we measure the limits of that pleasure by reason. The body receives as unlimited the limits of pleasure, and to provide it requires unlimited time. But the mind, grasping in thought what the end and limit of the body is, and banishing the terrors of futurity, like what's going to happen, our deaths, oh God, the economy, procures a complete and perfect life, and has no longer any need of unlimited time. Nevertheless, it does not shun pleasure, and even in the hour of death, when ushered out of existence, the mind does not lack enjoyment of the best life. What's he saying there? You can achieve happiness and fulfillment even if you have a limited amount of time. You don't need to live to be 120 years old to have a happy and complete life. Why? Well, again, because so much of how you experience and interpret life is going to come down to your mentality. How are you looking at this stuff? Are you conceiving things properly? Do you understand what they are? Do you understand what is causing your problems and your stress? Thus, we could say, we can use the mind to great effect in, well, making our lives less sufferable and more pleasurable. But at the same time, we have to remember something else about Epicureanism. Epicureanism is not going to say, you should spend all of your time thinking about stuff and getting lost in abstract, complex intellectual puzzles. I mean, maybe if that makes you happy, you can do that. But in matters of knowledge, we should learn from experience. We should understand the limits of our reason and use it appropriately. We shouldn't allow ourselves to get lost endlessly in these problems of logic and philosophy. So there is an appropriate way to use the mind in order to cultivate a pleasurable, complete, happy life. We use it within its limits, but we shouldn't heap unnecessary suffering upon ourselves. For instance, in trying to divine the epistemic justifiability of worldviews or something. Which is something that I like to do, but which is racks your brain. Okay? Okay, maybe these two sections will get you talking a little bit more. Let's look at sections 27 and 28. What does he say? Of all the means which are procured by wisdom to ensure happiness throughout the whole of life, by far the most important is the acquisition of friends. The same conviction which inspires confidence that nothing we have to fear is eternal or even of long duration also enables us to see that even in our limited conditions of life, nothing enhances our security so much as friendship. Okay, what's he saying there? If we want to live a pleasurable, happy life, what should we make sure to pursue and attain? He says it right in there. What is it? Oh. Yeah. Friendships! Yes, exactly! Don't you all have friends? Don't your friends bring you enjoyment? What good are friends? What do friends do? What do they provide for you? Nothing? Your friends aren't giving you anything. Kick him to the fucking curb then. What are you doing? No, what do your friends provide you? Yeah. Relationships and conversations. Okay, bad relationships? Good relationships. Okay. Yeah, and what else? What's so cool about conversation? Perspective. Maybe it helps you learn more about the world. Maybe your friends can act as a mirror and help you see things about yourself that you didn't know. Maybe conversation itself with people that you care about is just pleasurable, right? According to Epicurus, If you have good friends, they do a lot for you. Okay? They have the capacity to really improve your life if you keep the appropriate people around you. Okay? So he would say, like, a happy, pleasurable life requires friendship. There are some people in life who are hermits, who just want to get away from it all. I'm kind of like that. I don't hate people, but I would be very content seeing maybe 2 people for the rest of my life. Nevertheless, even me, who is a homebody, who likes sitting on the couch, I still derive value from certain relationships, right? There is a need in human beings for some sort of engagement or relationship with others. If you don't believe me, just read the testimonies of people who are in solitary confinement for a long time. It's terrible. Being alone and isolated for extended periods of time doesn't allow you to fulfill that social need, right? That desire that you have. So Epicurus is going to say, you want to be happy? Get yourself some friends. Some true friends. Not those fair weather friends that like to hang out when you happen to score MDMA, but the friends that are going to stick by you, that love you and that want to see you grow. Friends that are going to be honest with you, that are going to tell you when you're doing something stupid, right? Jenna, why the hell are you going on a date with him? You know he's a fuckboy. Don't even text him back. Right? Sarah, I know you love Smirnoff Ice, but you can't be drinking 12 of those a day. That's not good for you. So we should cultivate friendships. But not just that. If my memory serves correctly, one of the reasons why Epicurus' philosophy got popular is because he actually set up something like a commune in ancient Greece. I believe it was called the Garden. And what did he and his friends do there? They hung out, and they talked, and they ate food, and they drank some wine now and then together. And they chilled. So you should cultivate friends, but beyond that, what Epicurus thinks is that we should work to develop and live in community with our friends, which is a very different way of life than we are experiencing right now, right? I said this before and I'll say it again. We live in our own concrete boxes. We drive to school or work in our metal boxes. For fun, we look at our own little screen boxes. We're not as connected to other people in some fundamental ways as we used to be, or our ancestors were. We don't live in tribal communities anymore where everybody knows everybody and everybody cares about everybody. And everybody's working together for people's mutual fulfillment and happiness. We live a rather individualistic life. Epicurus would say that probably isn't good. And he would probably say, you know, instead of moving across the country for a job and living alone away from your friends and family members, you should probably work on setting up a commune with your friends. Yes, that's uncertain and you might not know how to do it, but friends discuss things with us, they help us learn. We can share our experiences with them and them with us so we know how we should act. And here's a basic thing. Communities are also helpful for helping us achieve our goals. and providing us with both psychological and physical security. If somebody busts down your dorm room door, maybe you have one roommate to help fight them off? Imagine if you lived in a commune with your friends. You got 5 other people there, right? More security, more force in numbers, right? Especially with people that you love and that love you. Maybe some of you are best friends with your roommate. I don't know. I had a roommate once and we said maybe 10 sentences to each other the whole time we were living together. I'm not sure he would have risked his life to save mine if somebody tried to burgle our apartment. Okay? But your friends would. Your true friends. So, we should cultivate friendships. We should live with our friends. What do you think about this? Do you think he's right? Yay or nay? Friends, yay or nay? I see a nod. Any other nods? Yeah, some nods. Okay. Yeah, I think it's easy in our world to think that we are connected to a lot of people because of social media and these platforms that we have, and we can reach more people now than we ever could in the history of the world. But are you really in relationship with those people? Are they actually serving you and helping you? Hopefully some of them. If Epicurus was alive today, he would probably say, get off that social media and go do stuff with your friends in the park. Actually surround yourself with people who want to see you grow and improve. Not people who are resentful and want to hold you back. But people who love and respect you and want you to bring out and actualize your potential. Those are the kinds of relationships that you should be trying to form. College is a great time to do that because there's a bunch of people here all living really close together. You can meet a lot of them. You can have all these conversations. So take advantage of that time. Don't just let it pass you by. This is basically Epicurus' life philosophy. I know I've said it a billion times, but it's rather simple. Seek after pleasure, but more importantly, just try to eliminate as much suffering as you can from your life. How can you do that? Well, you can gradually change your perception and your mental state. You can seek out professional help. You can work out. You can eat better. You can actually go to sleep at the same time every night and wake up at the same time every day. Am I doing that? Hell no. But I should be if I want to be happy. Maybe limit your drug and alcohol usage. Have fun, make memories, okay? I'm not being a prude here or whatever. But, you know what happens if you don't live moderately enough. too much of a thing is a bad thing, right? So just be aware of that. Cultivate relationships with those who care about you and want to see you succeed and grow. And try to dissolve the anxieties and the worries that you have about things that you can't control and the things that we don't know. Because if you don't, you're just heaping unnecessary suffering on yourself. This is Epicureanism. Simple, straight, boom. So, do y'all have any closing thoughts or ideas about it? Questions? I don't mind letting us go a few minutes early. Seems like we're tired. No questions? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay. All right. Well, I hope you found this interesting. Think about it. Talk about it with your friends and family members. Maybe this is the philosophy of life for you. However, we're not done. There are going to be a few other views that we look at that disagree fundamentally with this idea that pleasure is the highest good that we should be pursuing. Okay. Thank you for coming. I hope to see y'all on Wednesday. It'd be awesome if you did the reading. Otherwise, have a good week until then.